Hi and welcome to this YouTube tutorial. So in this video, I'm going to teach you how to build a simple chat application using Python, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, and most especially Django. So you can see I have two browsers open, Chrome and Safari. So now let's talk about how this project works. So what happens is that our backend creates a room and then it allows different users to log into that room and send messages to each other. So I'm just going to show you a quick demo. So right now it tells us to enter a username. So I'm just going to enter AYO, and then it asks us to enter a room name. So I'm just going to enter test. So I'm going to hit submit. Now what the program did was it's created a room. It's created the room and named it test. So I'm also going to do the same thing, but I'm going to log into the test room using a different username. So I'm going to log in as Pablo and I'm going to enter the room name of test and hit submit. Now what really happens is that anytime you enter a room name, the program checks to see if that room already exists. Now if the room already exists, it logs you into that room, but if the room does not exist, it creates the room then logs you into that room. Now how exactly do we know that these two users are in the same room? If I send a message from the Pablo username and I send hey, the message is going to send to the backend and get saved in this particular room, and then you can see it gets displayed in the other tab, and I can say how are you from this browser, and then once I hit send, you can see it was sent to the chat room and it was saved, and you can see all this is happening in real time. So I'm just going to reply here and say I am fine and hit send. So that is going to send to the chat room and it's going to be displayed here. Now the good thing about this is that you can have multiple people in the same chat room. So for example, I could log into the same chat room using, let's say, admin. I would enter test. Now once I log in, you can see all the messages that have been sent in this chat room are being displayed here, and I can send a message as a third person or as a third user to this chat room, and once I send hey guys, you are going to notice that it's going to be displayed right here. And then if I go back to the AYO username, you can see all the messages are also being displayed. So this is basically what we are going to be building in this tutorial. That was a very long intro. Now let's get into the main project. Now I want you to note that all the code to this project is going to be on my GitHub, and there's going to be a link in the description that will take you to my GitHub. And then there are also going to be chapters and timestamps that you can use to skip ahead in this video, just in case you are familiar with the part. Now I created a cheat sheet that we are going to be following just to make the tutorial kind of ordered. So the first thing we need to do is create a projects directory. So make sure you cd into where you want this project directory to be and then create it. So I'm going to say mkdir chat. Now after creating this directory, I'm going to cd into chat. Now the next thing we need to do is create a virtual environment. Now the way I create virtual environments is I use the pipenv library. If you want to get this library, just run the command pip install pipenv. Now I already have it installed, so it's going to say requirement already satisfied for me. So you can either choose to use pipenv or you can create a virtual environment in whatever way you want, but I prefer using pipenv. So using pipenv, how exactly do we go about this? We run the command pipenv shell. So once you run this command, it's going to create a virtual environment for you, and it's going to automatically activate this virtual environment, and then it's going to name your virtual environment your present working directory. That is, the current folder that you are in is going to be the name of your virtual environment. Now if you want to exit the virtual environment, you just type exit and press enter, exit, and press enter, and you can see it has exited. And if you want to reactivate it, you just type pipenv shell all over again, and then it reactivates this virtual environment. So that is that about pipenv and creating a virtual environment. The next step is we now need to install Django. So run the command pip install Django, because obviously we need Django to build this project. So after doing that, the next thing we now need to do is create a Django project. So run the command django-admin start project, and I'm going to name it chat project. So I'm going to click enter, and when I say ls, I can see the chat projects folder has been created for me. So I'm going to cd into chat project. Now the next step we need to do is we now need to create an application. So I'm going to run the command python manage.py start app, and I'm going to name it chat app. So once I do that and I say ls, you can see I already have an app folder created for me. So now the next step is we now need to open this folder in our code editor. Now I use Visual Studio Code, so I am going to open this folder in Visual Studio Code. So I am just going to try to navigate to where I have this folder. So I'm going to open it in my Visual Studio Code. So according to the guidelines that I had created, the next step is we need to add this app to the installed apps in our projects folder. So go to your settings.py file in your projects folder and scroll down to installed apps. So the next step is now we need to register this app inside our settings.py file. So I'm just going to pass in chat app into this list of installed apps. So that is that. Then next step we need to take is we need to create a templates folder, and then we need to set up the templates, basically tell Django where to find our templates folder. So the first thing that we need to do is create this templates folder in our root directory. Our root directory is where we have the manage.py file. So I am going to create this folder and call it templates. Now I'm going to move it to the right directory, which is my root directory. So after creating this folder, I want you to scroll down up until line 58 where you have dirs, and then in quotes just pass in templates. It's templates, templates. So after doing that, just save it. Now the next step we need to do is we need to set up our urls.py file. So I want you to create a urls.py file inside your app folder. So call it urls.py. And then in this folder, we are just going to be creating all our URLs and routes for each view we create, so that we don't have to create these URLs in our project folder. We would want to create it in our app folder. So I'm going to say from django.urls import path. Now the next step is to create a URL patterns list that is going to house all the URL paths. So I'm going to say URL patterns, and I will equate that to an empty list. So after doing this, we now need to tell Django that we have a URLs file inside our app folder. So I want you to go to the urls.py file inside your projects folder, and then in line 17 here, after import path, we're just going to import include. Then we need to tell Django to include the URLs file inside our app folder. So we're going to create a new path, and then we're going to leave the code empty, and then we're going to say include, and inside parentheses and quotes, I'm going to say chat app.urls. So basically we're telling Django to go into the chat app folder, and then we want you to take note that there is a urls.py file inside this chat app folder. So after doing that, let's check our cheat sheet. So we've set up URL routing. Now we need to set up static files in order to make sure that everything is going to work properly. Now I have forgotten the exact way to set it up, so I am just going to quickly copy it from somewhere, from one of my GitHub repositories. Right, so I am going to copy this 3 lines. So I want you to go to your settings.py file, and then where you have this static URL, just replace everything with what you see here. So you have static URL, static root, and static files dirs. Now we're just doing this to make sure that Django can find all our static files being your JavaScript and your CSS, because we are going to have JavaScript and CSS files in the future. So we need to import the OS library. So import OS. Then after importing OS, just make sure you set up your static files like this to avoid any future errors. So just save the settings file. Now the next step, according to our cheat sheet, is to set up our views.py file. But before we do that, let's just run our server to make sure everything is working perfectly fine. So I'm going to say python manage.py run server. Okay, so I currently have a server running, so I'm going to break out of this and then I'm going to run this. Okay, so now we have our server running, and then once I go to my browser and run my local server, you can see it says the install works successfully, congratulations. So now we know our Django installation worked successfully, so we can proceed to the next step. And the next step is to basically set up our views and get all the necessary files that we need to build this project. Now for the files that we need, there's going to be a link in the description that will take you to my GitHub, where you can get these files, and then you'll be able to use them. So just check the description and there's going to be a link where you can get these files. So the first files that we need to get are the HTML files, because obviously we would need to render HTML files so that the users can actually view something. So for that, I had saved these files somewhere on my desktop. So for you, all you need to do is use that link in the description and you will be able to get it. So I am just going to open these files, open the folder where I kept these files, and I am going to keep them in the templates folder. So I am going to save my HTML files inside the templates folder that I had created. So make sure you keep the HTML files that you download, make sure you take them and keep them in the templates folder, because that is where we are going to be retrieving our HTML files from. So after doing that, the next step we now need to take is we now need to create a home page view, view in our views.py file, and then we need to render the home page or the index.html page. So I want you to go to your views.py file inside your app folder, and then we need to create a view, and I'll just call this home page, and this is going to pass in request, and we just need to return render a template. So I'm going to say return render. I'm going to pass in request. Now the next thing we need to do is pass in the name of the file, which is index.html. So right now we need to create a URL for this home page view. So go to your urls.py file inside your app folder, and then at the top we need to say we need to make a relative import. We need to say from dot import views. So we're importing the views.py file so that we will be able to map each view to a URL to a path. So we need to create a new URL. Then I'm going to say path, and I am going to leave this quote empty. I am doing this because I want this to be the home page. That is, anytime the users visit our link, the first page they would see as the home page is this index.html file that is being rendered. So what I'm going to say next is views.homepage, and I'm going to give this a name of home, and I'll put a comma here. So after doing that, all we need to do is go back to the browser and make sure your server is running. So after doing that, just reload the home page, and then you can see that this page, this whole HTML file with styling has been returned back to us. So this is the first step, or this is a good step. Now we know that we can view the home page, and then this form is being returned to us. So after doing that, the next step we now need to do is we now need to we now need to create models. So the models that we're going to create is just going to basically tell our database what kind of data what kind of data is going to be saved. So let's go to our models.py file, and then we need to create a model here. So according to the cheat sheet that I had created, the first model we need to create is called room. So basically this model is just going to house the room names. That is, anytime somebody is trying to log into a room, that's particular name that the person is typing in, we need to create a model that's capable of saving those room names to the database. So just say class room, and this is going to inherit from models.model. And then after doing this, I'm just going to create a single field, and I'm going to name that field room name. So I'm going to say room underscore name is equals to models dot char field or character field, and in here I'm going to pass in a max length of, let's say, 255. So after doing that, we now need to say def underscore str underscore self, and then we need to return self.room name. So retur. So I am going to explain why we are doing this very soon, but I want you to just follow along. So after doing that, the next model that we need to create is the message model. So we have created the room name. We now actually need to create a model that is going to save messages that is going to configure how messages are going to be saved in the database. So I'm just going to create the class, and I'm going to name it message, and it's also going to inherit from models.model. So the first field that we are going to create is going to be named room. Now this is going to be a foreign key to a room model. So how our project is going to work is, anytime a room is created and messages are sent in that room, every message that is sent in that room is going to be connected to every message that is sent is going to be connected to the room. So that means that the room now becomes like a unique identifier, and then using a room name we can get every message that has been sent in that room. I hope you understand what I just said. To make it more, or to clarify it more, anytime a user logs into a room and sends a message, that message is automatically tied and connected to that room. So if we would like to access every message in a room, we will just need to query the room and then filter through the message model to get every single message under the room name. So if you didn't understand, I just want you to watch that part over again, and you are going to see how this works in the future. So the next step is we're going to create a model, and then we're going to call it room, and equates us to models.foreign key FOR, and then I'm going to pass in room, and after this I'm going to say on delete equals models.cascade. Now what does on delete equals models.cascade mean? What this means is that if a room is deleted, every single message that is connected or tied to that room will also be deleted. So that's exactly what it means. So we don't want a situation where if a room is deleted, the messages are also still present. So we want to do it in such a way that, so basically, to sum it all up, anytime a room is deleted, every message that is associated with that room is also going to be deleted. And also, a foreign key just helps us connect a model to a different model. Right. Now, the next field that we need to create is the sender model. That is, we would want to store who is sending this message, and we want to store the name of the person that is sending this particular message. So what we now need to do is we're going to create the field and name it sender, and then we'll equate that to models dot char field, and I am just going to pass in max length equals 255. So this is going to house the name of the person that is sending this message. Now the next field that we are going to create is the actual message field. So this is going to store the message that has been sent by this user. So what I am now going to pass in is I'll create a field named message, and I would equate that to models dot text field. And after doing that, I would just say def underscore underscore str underscore underscore, and I will pass in self, and I will say return self dot room. So self self. So again, you are going to understand why I am saying def underscore underscore str. I am going to explain why we're doing this shortly. So now the next step we need to take after creating the models is that we need to register them in our admin.py file so that we can actually view these models, or we can view the data in the admin dashboard. So I want you to go to the admin.py file inside your application folder, and then we now need to import this model. So I am going to say from dot import models, so making a relative import. Now the next step we need to take is we need to now register these models. So I am going to say admin.site.register. So what we now need to do is we need to pass in the models that we had created. So models.room. So I am going to do the exact same thing for message. So models.message. Now, in order to now actually view these models in our admin dashboard, we need to create a super user. Now, I am just going to break out of this server. And sorry, before creating a super user, we need to make migrations and migrate, because we had just made changes to our models.py file. So run the command python manage.py make migrations. So that's just going to create these models for us. Then after doing that, run python manage.py migrate. So once you run that, it's just going to make all those changes to the database. So what I now need to do is create a super user. So I am going to type python manage.py create super user. So we're doing this so that we can gain access to the admin dashboard. So enter a username. I'm just going to type in admin. I'm going to leave the email empty. So I'll type in a password, and I'm going to type yes. So now it tells us super user successfully created. So how can we now know that it was created successfully? So what we need to do is run our server and try to log into the admin dashboard. So just go to /admin and then log in with those details that you had just created. And as you can see, you can see we've been logged into the admin dashboard, and then we are able to see these models that we created, messages and rooms, because we had registered them in the admin.py file. So now to explain why we had put this def underscore underscore str, return self.room name and return self.room. The reason why we did that is because anytime a room is created, we would like to view the room name right here. So for example, if I create a room and name it test, once I hit save, you can see that it is actually the name test is being displayed. But if I decide to remove this def underscore str that I had put, once I refresh, you can see it only shows us room object 1. So in order to actually view the data properly, that is why I am just telling the program to return to us or display the actual room name so that we can view what it is. So once I refresh, you can see the name of the room is test, and then it shows us the name of the room is test when we are going through the list of rooms. So I am just going to delete that for now. So we have successfully created our models and we have registered those models in the admin.py file. According to our cheat sheet, the next step is we now need to configure the home page form and basically configure the landing page, which is this page. So that is the next section of this video or tutorial. Okay, so on to the next step. So we now need to open this index.html file because we are about to start working with it. So according to the cheat sheet, we now need to first of all, we need to make sure we have a method of post. Okay, fine. The form has method of post because we are trying to take the data from this form and send it somewhere. So we are posting this data to the backend. So the next step that we now need to do is make sure we have CSRF token in this form. So we need to have CSRF token because if we do not have it, anytime we submit this form, it's going to give us an error. So CSRF token is it's like a security feature that is added to forms in Django. So just put the percent signs and curly bracket and type in CSRF underscore token, TOKEN. So after doing that, the next step that we need to take is to make sure that we give each input field a name attribute. So for this username attribute or field, username field, I'm going to give it a name of username, and then for this room name, I'm going to give it a name of room. So this is essential because these are going to serve as unique identifiers, and they are going to help us grab what the user has entered in the front end. So we're going to make use of these names in the back end, as they are going to help us grab what the user has entered in the front end. So according to the cheat sheets that we have, the next step we now need to do is we now need to check for incoming post request in the backend. So what that means is that anytime the user has filled this form and submitted, obviously we know that it's a post request that is going to be sent to the backend, which is this view. So we now need to write code to check if any post request is coming in, so that we can handle when a user fills this form and submits. So what we need to say is if request dot method is equal to post, and after doing that, what we now need to do is grab what the person has inputted in the front end. Now we can do this by making use of this name attribute that we gave this input field. So what I am now going to type in here is username is equals to request.post, and I am going to create a list here, and inside this list I'm going to pass in username. Now why exactly did we pass in username into this code? The reason why we pass in username into that code is because we had given this input field a name of username. So if it was something like name, I would also pass in name into this place. Now the next thing we need to do is grab the room name that the person had inputted. So I am going to say room is equals to request dot post, and I am just going to grab the room and I would say room. Now I am saying room because we gave this input field the name of room. Now take note that this has to be identical. Whatever you pass into this quote in the list has to be identical to the names that you give this input field. If not, you will have an error. Now the next step we need to take is that it says get the room name, and so checking our cheat sheets, we now need to check if the room object exists and using a try and except block. So basically what that means is that, remember when I had started this video, what I explained was anytime a user enters the username and room name, the program is going to check if that room name already exists, and if it exists, it's going to redirect the person to that particular room. But if it doesn't exist, it's going to create the room, then redirect the person to the room that it had just created. So what we now need to do is we need to write code to check if this room exists. So before we can do that, we need to now import this room model into our code. So I am going to say from .models import room. All right, so now we are going to attempt to try to get if this room exists. If it exists, we are going to pass, but if it doesn't exist, we are going to create this room. Now we're going to use try and except blocks for this. So I am going to say try, and I am going to create a variable called get room. So here I am going to try to get the room, that is I am checking if the room exists. So I'm going to say room dot objects dot get, and I will say if we go back to the models, notice that we give this field a field name of room underscore name. So inside this parenthesis, I'm going to pass in room underscore name is equal to room. So what we're essentially saying is I want you to go to this room model and then try to look for a particular item under this room model that has the name of the room that the user entered in the front end. So what that means is anytime somebody enters a room name in the front end, the backend is going to try to search and check if that room exists. So what if this room doesn't exist? I'm going to say except a room dot does not exist, that is except this room does not exist, then I want you to perform something. So we now need to create a new room that has the room name of, we need to create a new room that is equal to what the user entered in the front end. That is, anytime a user enters a room name in the front end and the person submits, the program will first check if that room already exists. If the room doesn't exist, it's going to create that room in this except block. So I'm going to create a variable and say new underscore room is equal to room, room, and then inside parentheses I'm just going to say room name is equal to room. So after doing this, I'll just say new room dot save. So what we now actually need to do is we now need to create a different view that is going to house where all these messages are going to be displayed. But before we do that, what we now need to do is test to see if all this code is working, because we've been writing all these code things, but we have not tested to see if this code is working. So to test if this code is working, the first thing that we're going to test is to see if our post request is actually coming in. So I'm just going to print let's say username. So I am going to print username to check if a post request is actually going to come in when we fill this form. So hopefully we do not get an error. So I am going to refresh and enter some random text and then hit submit. So I hit submit and the form data submitted, And then when I check the terminal, you can see what I entered in the front end was printed out in the terminal, which is admin. So now we can confirm that the post request is actually coming in from the front end, and we're able to grab the data that the user had entered in the form. So the next step is we now need to run this try and except blocks to see if our code runs. So what I'm going to do is go to the front end and refresh. So I'm going to enter a username of Pablo and enter a room name of test. Now, because we do not have sorry, let me go to the dashboard, the admin dashboard, and go to /admin. And then when I go to rooms, you can see we currently do not have any room. So when I enter Pablo and enter test as a room name and I hit submit, when we come back to the dashboard and we refresh, you can see there is a new model called test. So what happened was, when the user, which was me, when I hit submit, what the program did was it tried to check to see if that room existed. But since the room didn't exist in database, it's now came to this except block, and then it's created a new room and saved this new room to the database. So right now we can confirm that our code is working perfectly, and then our code can now create rooms, and then it can now check if a room exists, and if the room doesn't exist, it's capable of creating that room for the users. So after creating and saving rooms, the next thing we now need to do is we need to create a new view that is actually going to be where these users are going to be redirected to. That is going to be the view where they can send messages, view messages, and basically interact with other users. Now this is going to be called the message view. So I'm going to create the view and call it def message view, VIEW. I will pass in request. Now this view is going to take in a number of parameters, because we are going to need these parameters in order to query data from database. Now you are going to see how this is going to work. So the first parameter that this is going to take in is room name and username. So I'm going to put a comma here, type in room underscore name and username, USERNAME. Now don't worry, I am going to explain why we're doing this very soon. So we now need to return render this template, which is message.html. Remember that we had gotten two templates files, index.html and message.html. So I'm just going to pass in request here, and after passing in request, I'm going to pass in message.html. Now the next step that we need to do is we need to create a folder called templates folder, because this current HTML file isn't linked to any static file. So we need to connect it to a static file, and in order to store our static files, which are our CSS and JavaScript, we need to create a folder called static. So create a folder in your root directory. Again, your root directory is where your manage.py file is, and name it static, static. So make sure it's in your root directory. Now after doing that, I am just going to move the CSS file that is needed into that folder. So I'm going to come to my desktop over here, and then I'm going to look for this file style.tss, and I'm going to move it into the static folder. So this is the file that I needed. Now again, if you would like to find these files, there's going to be a link in the description that will take you to my GitHub where you can get these files. Now the next thing we now need to do is we need to create a URL for this particular view. So what I am going to do is I am going to navigate my way to the urls.py file, and then after doing that, I am going to create a URL for this now. So I'm going to pass in path, and in here, remember that in the views.py file, it's okay. So in this particular view, if you remember, it takes two variables from the URL, which are room name and username. So what we need to do is we need to create a way for these variables to be passed into the URL. So what I am going to say is I am going to create open and closing angle brackets, and in here I'm going to say str colon room underscore name. We are saying this because the first variable that is being passed in is room underscore name, and then the next is username. So I'm also going to say / str colon username, and then after doing that I would say views dot message view, and I will give this a name of message. So again, we are saying str colon room name and str colon username because we will try to pass in variables through this URL, and then we are going to attempt to grab those variables in our views.py file right here. So if we go to the front end right now, and then we try to go to we try to visit this URL, which is room name / username. So I am just going to put in dummy text. So room name, maybe test / username, let's say Ayo, and I press enter. You can see we are being returned this basic HTML template. Now we need to access the CSS file that we had just put into our project in order for the CSS to load. So what we need to do is go to that particular templates file, which is message.html, and at the top we need to say load static, because we are trying to load a static file into our HTML file. So what I'm going to say is link, and then inside this href I'm just going to link this dynamically to the static file. So I'm going to type in static, and in quotes I will say style.css. Now once I save that and I refresh the page, you should see that the CSS should kick in, and this is how the HTML page looks like. Now again, the reason why I went to this dummy URL test / a random name is because the URL that we created must accept a room name and a username variable. Now if you want to know why we are doing this, I can come back here, and in this view I can print out the room name, and I can also print out the username. So if I try to visit a room name of, let's say, tutorial, and I put a name of, let's say, Pablo, and I hit enter, if I come to my terminal, you can see that tutorial and Pablo have been printed out. So basically it's just a way to pass in variables to the URL and access those variables in our views.py file. So that is exactly why we have created this URL like this. So after creating this this view, the next thing we now need to do is come back to this homepage view. Now remember that I said anytime a user enters their username and room name, it's going to try to see if that room exists, and if the room exists, it's going to pass, and then if the room doesn't exist, it's going to create that new room. So if the room exists, what should happen after it has determined if the room exists? What we now need to do is we need to now redirect the users to that particular room if the room exists. So in order to redirect, we need to import from Django.shortcut. So I'm just going to pass in redirects right here. So after determining that the room exists, what we now need to tell the program is we now need to tell the program to redirect the person to that room. So I'm going to say return redirect, And if I come to my URLs, remember we give this view a name of message, but we can just change this to room to make it more understandable, I guess. So we have given this URL a name of room, and then this URL is where users can access their chats and view chats, because it's like the chat room. So what we're now going to tell the program to do is, after determining that that room exists, we now need to redirect this person to that particular room. But also take note of something. We need to take note that this URL needs two variables, and so we need to now pass in these two variables into the URL. The first variable is room name and the second variable is username. So what I am going to say is room underscore name is equal to room, and then username is equals to username is equals to username. So why exactly are we saying this? We are saying this because, again, we are trying to pass in variables into the URL so that those variables can be accessed in this message view, because we are going to need those variables in order to query data and send to the front end, data being the chats that exist in that room. So what we have done here is we are telling the program to redirect the person to a room. Sorry, it's supposed to be room, not room name. We're telling the program to redirect the person to this room view, and also we're trying to pass in these two variables, which is going to be the room that the person entered and then the username of the person. So we are going to test this, and you are going to see it happen in real time. So what if the room doesn't exist? We also want the program to work in this way. Anytime the program checks and determines if the room does not exist, when it does determine that the room does not exist, we want you to create that room, and after creating the room, we want you to redirect the person to that particular room. So that is why I am also telling the program to redirect the person to that particular room. Now what we need to do is we now need to test our program to see if it works. So I am just going to go to the home page, and I'm going to enter let's say Pablo, and for a room name I would enter test2. Now if we go to the admin dashboard, remember that there is no room called test2. So once I hit submit, you can see that we have been automatically redirected to this particular room. And once I reload the admin dashboard, you can see that this room was created. So what the program did was it created that room in this except statement, and after creating the room, it's now redirected to the person to the room that it had just created, which is this room. So right now we can tell that our code is working perfectly. So after doing all that, the next step that we now need to do is we now need to return every message that has been created in this room to the front end. That is, anytime a user enters a room, we want the user to be able to actually view all the messages that have been created in that room. So what that means is, if a room has been created before and then there have been messages sent in that room, when a new user enters that room, we would want the new user to be able to view the old messages that have been sent in that particular room. So what we now need to do is query all the messages that have been sent in this room and return them to the front end. So according to the cheat sheet, it says go back to the message view and get the room object from the URL parameter and messages associated with the room. So what we can now do here is, because we can access the room name that the user had entered in the front end, what you can now do is, using that room name, we can get the room object from the database. So what I'm going to say is get room is equals to room.objects.get, and I'm going to pass in room name is equals to room name. Now I am saying room underscore name because in the models.py file, the name of this field is room underscore name, and then I am equating this to room underscore name because the variable room underscore name has been equated to what the user enters in the front end. I know it might be confusing, but if you are confused, just watch that again, and please make sure you understand. And if you have any question, you can leave it in the description and I would answer you. So the next thing we now need to do is, after getting this room name, we now need to get every message that has been created in this room. That is, every message that is associated or tied to this room. Now we can do this easily because we had created a foreign key earlier, and then this foreign key essentially ties or bounds, or binds rather, is binds every message created in this room to the actual room. That is, every message that is being sent in this room is always going to be in this room, because we have already told the program to bind that message to this particular room that it's being created in using foreign key. So what we can now do is, after getting the room, we can now filter and get every single message that has been created in this room. So what I'm going to say is, get messages is equals to message. Okay, we need to import this library at the top. So from those models, import message. So what we now need to say is message.objects.filter, and then inside this dot filter, I'm going to say room is equals to get room. Now we are saying dot filter because we are telling the program essentially to just search through the database and gather every single message that is connected to this particular room, and then we are equating room equals to get room again, because we are trying to get every message that is associated with this room that we had just gotten at the top. Now what we now simply need to do next, according to our cheat sheet, is that we need to return this message, and then we need to return the person's username to the front end in a context, so that this data can actually be visualized. So we need to say context, and then I'm going to create a dictionary, and inside this dictionary I would say messages, and I would equate that to get messages. And after doing that, I will also create a new item and name it user, and I will equate that to username. We are passing in the person's username because we would like to write some conditionals, and then we are going to need this particular username. Now before I forget, okay, right, okay, we're on track. I haven't forgotten anything yet according to the cheat sheet. So right now, if I go to this message.html and scroll down, you will notice that there are some divs that have been created. Now these divs are responsible for displaying these messages in the front end. So that is why you see two empty dots here. But as we write more code and as we build on, you would see the need of these two boxes, and you are going to see everything really come together in a beautiful way. So the next step, according to the cheat sheet, is that we need to write some JavaScript. Now before writing this JavaScript, I need you to take note of something. If you look at this form right here, if you look at this div right here in the HTML file, you will notice that there is a form, and this form has a method of post, and it has an ID of message. Now this form basically is just this input field that you see right here in the front end. So this form basically is responsible for collecting the message from the user and then sending that message to the database to be saved. So we are going to talk about this in the next step. So before we actually start writing this Ajax or JavaScript, what we need to do is we now actually need to first test this form to see if it works. That is, we need to write code that is capable of getting a message from this form, and then once we hit submit, we want that data to be sent to the front end, or rather to the back end, and get saved. So basically that means users will be able to type a message and hit send, and it will be saved in a database so that it can be displayed back to the users. So excuse me, what we now need to do is, right inside this form, we need to pass in CSRF token. Now remember, anytime you create a form in Django, you should always pass in CSRF token, just for security. And even if you don't pass it in, you are going to get an error. Now the next step that we need to take is, we now need to give this text area a name attribute. So I'm going to name it message. So after doing that, I am going to go back to my views.py file, and then I am going to check to see if a post request is actually coming in from the front end. That is, when a user fills this form and submits it, it's going to send again a post request to the backend. So I am now going to check for incoming requests. I'm going to say if request dot method is equal to post, that is, if there's any data coming in from the front end, then what we now need to do is, we now need to grab the message that the person has entered. So I am going to say create a variable and name it message, and I will request us to request.post, and in here I would pass in message. We're passing in message here because we had given this text area a name attribute of message. So just save it, and then let's try to print out this message just to be sure that it's going to come in. So I will go back to the front end, refresh, and just type in some random gibberish and hit send. So once I hit send, the page reloaded. That means the form was submitted. And once I check the terminal, you can see that what we indeed entered in the front end was sent to the back end. Now what we now need to do is now actually save this message to the database. That is, once a user sends a message using this form, we now need to collect that message and save it in the backend. So what we need to do is, we need to create a variable and say new message is equals to, we'll create that to the message model, and inside this parenthesis here, we are going to take note, we are going to need to take note of a few parameters that we need to pass in. We need to pass in the room, the sender's name, and then the actual message. So the first thing that we need to do is assign a room to this message, or assign this message to a room. So I am going to copy line 27 right here, and then I will move it to the top. So I need to assign this message to this particular room because this message is being sent in this current room, and then we need to assign this message to the current room that the user is in. So what I'm going to say is room is equals to get room, and after doing that, I now need to specify the name of the person that is sending this message. So I'm going to say sender is equal to username, and I would say message is equal to message. Now why exactly are we passing in room, sender, and message? We're passing in these values because in the models.py file we had created 3 fields called room, sender, and message. So that is why we need to pass in these values. So after doing that, we'll just say new message.save. So this is going to first of all grab the message that the user entered, then create a new message object, and then it's going to save that object to the database. So let's save our code and just test it out. When we check the admin dashboard and go to messages, we can see there is currently no message. But what we can do now is refresh and just type in a message. This is my first message. And once I hit send and I come back to the backend, once I refresh, you can see that there is a new message. And once I click it, it says str. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to just edit the message model a bit. So just type str and then pass self.room into that, because what we were doing before was we were trying to return an object to be displayed, and we cannot do that. So what we need to do is first convert that into a string, and then we now need to display, we can now display the name. So once I come back and refresh, you can see that we have a new message, and the room is in test2. The sender is Pablo, and then the message, this is my first message. The sender is Pablo again, because remember when we had filled that first form, when we have filled this first form, the name we entered was Pablo, and then the room name we entered was the room name we entered was test2. So that is why this message has been assigned to the room name test2, and then the sender name has been assigned to the name called Pablo. So now we know that the messages that we send in the front end get saved in the back end. So that is perfect, and our code is working perfectly well. But there is still a tiny issue, or should I say a large issue, which is the elephant in the room. These messages have been saved to the backend, but how can the users actually view this message, and how can how can the users actually be sure that their messages are being sent and are being saved? This is where we are going to write JavaScript. So according to the cheat sheet, we need to write some JavaScript that is going to take all these messages and send to the backend. And that issue is that if you notice, anytime we fill this form and we submit it, the page reloads. In a standard chat application like WhatsApp or Facebook, anytime you send a message, the page doesn't reload. So what we are going to make use of is called Ajax. So this is going to help us send data to the backend without having the page reload. So we are going to see how all of this is going to work. So I want you to create a new file in your static folder called main.js, and then in your message.html file, what we need to do is now need to write a script and source that is going to point to this main.js, so that our HTML file can find the JavaScript file. So I am going to link this dynamically. So I would say static, and in here I would pass in main.js. So I will just save that, so that our HTML file can find our JavaScript file. Now there's also another thing that we need to take note of, right? The fact that these messages have been saved, but they are not being displayed in the front end. So what we can do before writing this JavaScript is we can just write code that is going to display these messages for us in the front end. So I would like to split my screen into two halves so that you can see what is happening. So let me just open my views.py file. Now if you remember, we had returned this context. Okay, we need to pass this context into this return render. So if you remember, we had created this context, and this context basically is responsible for returning the messages that have been created in this room and then the username. So we are passing in this data to the context so that we can make use of data in our HTML file, which is the front end. So when you come over to this div right here called receive, this div is responsible for displaying messages that have been sent by the other users. That is, every message that appears in this div called receive is going to be displayed here, because right here, because we didn't send it, so we are receiving this message. So what we now need to do is, at this point, we need to write a for loop that is going to loop through over every message and check if each message has been sent by the current user that is in that room. So you are going to understand what I mean shortly. So first, what we need to do is write a for loop, right? So we're going to say for I in messages. We are saying for I in messages because the context we passed in was messages, and that context just returns all the messages in this room. So anytime you create a for loop in Django, you always have to end that for loop. So I am going to say end for. So I'll indent this properly. Now the next step we now need to do is we now need to write a conditional to check if each message is equal to this username. So let me split it up a little bit. So what we are going to do is we are going to check if each message has been sent by this current user that is logged in. I wouldn't really say logged in, but what I mean is that anytime this program loops through the messages, the program is going to check if the current message that it is looping through has been sent by the current user that is logged into the chat room. So you are going to see how this works. So what we need to say is if I.sender is not equal to user. Now I am going to explain why we are doing this. So we now need to end if. So I am going to say end if, and I just need to indent this properly. Okay, so basically what we are now saying here is we are looping through this message, and then we're checking if the I.sender is not equal to user. I.sender here basically stands for the sender in the message. The reason why we're saying I.sender is because we're looping through each message. So basically I is the iterator. So now we're saying if I.sender, that is if the sender of that message is not equal to user. Now where does this user come from? This user comes from the views.py file. Remember, the user that is being returned is the user that is currently logged into this particular room. Sorry, username right here. So what that means is that since I am currently logged in as Pablo in this room, what the program is going to do is that it's going to loop through every message and check if each message was sent by me, and if this message wasn't sent by me. Now what that means is we can now know whether each message was sent by the currently logged in user, or if the message wasn't sent, if the message wasn't sent by the logged in user. So if the message wasn't sent by the logged in user, obviously that message is going to be a received message for that user, because I didn't send the message, so that means I am receiving that message, meaning that somebody else sent it. So we are going to display that message in the receive div. So I'm just going to pass in I.message right here, and inside this strong tag I'm going to pass in, okay, let me just make this a full page so that it doesn't look confusing. I'm going to pass in I.sender. So basically you are going to be able to see the message, and then you are also going to be able to see the sender of that message. Now what if the message that the program now encounters has been sent by currently logged in user? We now need to put this receive div. We now need to write an else and put that message inside the receive div. So I'm going to put an else block here. I'll say else, and I will paste this HTML, this send div right here. So again, to go over what I had just talked about, it's first going to loop over the message, and then it's going to check if the sender of the message is not equal to the currently logged in user. So if the message is not equal to, if the sender of the message is not equal to the logged in user, it means that the user didn't send this message. So it's going to be a received message. So it's going to be displayed in the receive div, which is here. Then if the message indeed was sent by the currently logged in user, we would like to display this message. So I'm just going to type in I.message right here. So that is why we are putting an else block. So once we refresh, let's just refresh this page. So you see we are getting an error, could not pass the remainder are not equal to user. So let's check our code to make sure everything is working perfectly fine. If I.send are not equal to user, what error is this? Okay, so we have fixed this error right now. So what you can now see is, because we sent this message, you can see it's being displayed in the send should I say div? Yeah, because we have sent this message, it's being displayed in the sent div. So basically what we've been able to do right now is we've been able to write code that is able to register a person, and that is able to log a person into a chat room. Now, to show you that this code works, what we're simply going to do is we're going to enter this particular chat room using a different name. So I'm going to enter with test user, and I would just enter the room name test2. And then once I enter the room name, what do you have? You can notice that there is a div, there is a message called this is my first message. Since it isn't by since the message wasn't sent by test user, you can see that it is being displayed in this other div called receive. So just to make it legible, I'm just going to put a dash, and then once I refresh, so you can see it says dash Pablo, meaning a dash the name of the person that sent this message. So I'm just going to remove this right here so that I can get rid of this empty div. So you can see everything is working perfectly now. And then if I try to send a message and I say hey bro, and I hit send, let's refresh. Let's refresh the page to see if the message was sent. Okay, so let's check the admin dashboard. So refresh and see. So the message wasn't sent, we have an error. Let's check our terminal. So let me just make sure I don't have any other virtual environments running. So I'm just going to exit out of this other virtual environment just to make sure I don't have clashes. All right, so I had fixed the error. I had a different virtual environment running, so it was giving me issues. So right now, if I send a message and say hey you, and I hit send, you can see the page reloaded, and then the message was saved in the database, and it was now redisplayed here, and all that happened and the page reloaded. So what we want is, we do not want the page to reload. So as we continue writing, we are going to use Ajax and JavaScript and also jQuery to fix that. Now if I come back to the other tab, you'll notice that the other message isn't being displayed here, and we have to refresh in order for the other message to be displayed. So we are going to write some code that is going to automate this process for us, and it's going to happen in real time, and everything is going to work out very nice. So we now need to start writing our JavaScript file. So what I am going to do is we need to go to the main.js. So the main.js is where we are going to be writing our JavaScript file. So basically what we now need to do is, we now need to check and see, we need to write some JavaScript code that is always going to listen for when this form is about to be submitted. That is, what that means is, anytime a user is hit send, we need a JavaScript function or some JavaScript code that is going to fire or activate some other code that we're going to write anytime the user clicks send. So basically we're just going to write a listener, so it's going to listen for when this form is submitted. So what we're going to say is we're going to put this $, and I'm going to, in parentheses, I will pass in document, and then what I would say is dot on and then in quotes I would say submit. So after doing that, we now need to pass in the ID of this particular form. Now I had already given this form an ID earlier, which is message. So what we're simply going to pass in here is in quotes, we're going to pass in the ID, hashtag the ID, because we're trying to tell this JavaScript to listen and check for when this form is about to be submitted. We want you to do some specific task. So I am now going to create a function here, and in parentheses I will pass in e, and after doing that I'll just create curly brackets. So what exactly do we now need to do? So when this form is about to be submitted, that is when this user has typed the message and has hit send, we now need to prevent the whole page from reloading. So to do that, we're going to say e dot prevent default, prevent default. So e does prevent default, and after doing that, what we now need to do is we now need to start using Ajax in order to send all this data to the backend, and all this is going to be done without the page being reloaded. So it's going to make it very neat. So what I am now going to do is I will create, I would say $, and I will say .ajax, and I'll just create parentheses and curly brackets. So the first value, or the first item that we need to specify, is the type. That is, what kind of request are we trying to make? Is it a post request? Is it a patch put get request? So since it's a post request, I'm just going to equate that to a post request. Now after doing that, the next thing that we need to specify is the URL. So I'm just going to say URL is equals to window dot location dot href. So basically what we are trying to say here is we want you to send this data to this current URL that you are on. That is, I want you to send this data to this particular URL. So since we have already written code that checks if a post request is coming in the backend, we know everything is going to work fine. So after declaring the URL, that is where we want this data to be sent, the next thing we now need to declare is the actual data that we want to send. So just equate that to curly bracket. Now what we now actually need to do here is we now need to specify what data we are sending, that is the message. So if we go back to the HTML file, I had already given this text area, that is where the users type their message, this text box. I had given it an ID of MSG. So we're going to be using an ID. We're going to be using that ID to grab whatever data the user has typed into the ID, or whatever message the user has typed into the ID, or the field. So we do that by saying $, and we open parentheses, and then in quotes we just pass in MSG, and then we're going to say .val. So why exactly are we doing this? Okay, before we do this, we need to create a variable for this data, and I will name it message, message, and I will equate that to this value. Now we're saying message here because in the backend we had already told the the program to make sure to check for a post request, and then once it's checking for a post request, it's going to look for some data that has a message, should I say placeholder or identifier. So if you remember, in the front end, in this text area, we gave it a name of message. So using this name message, it was able to grab what the person imputed in this form. But since we are switching over to Ajax, Ajax is going to be the middleman that is going to be sending this data to the backend. So since in the views we had already declared that we want you to grab data in message, we now need to specify that message is going to be equated to the data, that is the message that the user had typed. So basically, using this way, we will still be able to grab what the user had entered, even though we are switching over to JavaScript and Ajax in order to send this data for us. Now, the next thing that we need to declare is the CSRF middleware token. So what exactly is this CSRF middleware token? If you remember, in the HTML, once again, before we could send this message, before we could send a message, we had to specify CSRF token. Now, if we do not specify it in this Ajax post request, it is going to crash and give us an error. So in order to specify it, what we need to say is CSRF middleware token. Now make sure it's exactly what I am typing. Make sure whatever you type is exactly what I am typing. CSRF middleware token. So we are going to equate that to we would say this $sign and then open parentheses. So in this parentheses, we are going to create code, and then we are going to say input, and then inside this parenthesis we're also going to create a list, and we would say name is equals to CSRF middleware token, and then we're going to close this list, and we would say .val. So make sure whatever you type is exactly like this. So we'll say CSRF middleware token is equal to this. So this is just a way of grabbing the CSRF token and passing it into the post request, because if the CSRF token isn't present, remember, it's going to crash and give us an error, right? So what we now need to do is save and try this code to see if everything actually works. So I'm going to go to the backend, and then if you go to messages, you can see we have only 2 messages right now. So what we now need to do is we now need to test to see if our Ajax works. So I'm going to say hey man, and then I'm going to hit send. So to see if our code is working, we can come to this our admin dashboard and refresh. So I'm going to control refresh. So nothing happened. I think we are getting an error. So it did send the post request, so the message was supposed to be sent. So let's just go to the views.py file to make sure everything is working perfectly. So let's check to see if the message is coming in. I'm going to print message. So let's go back to the front end and try that. Hey man, and hit send. So let's check. So we're having an error. It says Django.multidict error message. So we might have spelled something wrong in our JavaScript. Let's check to be sure. MESSAGE, and in our views it's the same thing, MESSAGE. So I will have to debug and get back to you. Okay, so the silly error was from this place. So I was supposed to pass in hashtag MSG because we are trying to grab the user's input using the ID. So I had only passed in MSG, but that is wrong. I was supposed to pass in hashtag MSG. So I'm just going to redo the changes I made in the views when I was testing. Okay, so now we would like to print out the message that the person entered, just to test that our Ajax post request is working. So I'll just make sure that the server is running, and then I'll just type in I am a boy and hit send. So what we can now do is check the terminal, and then you can see that I am a boy has been printed out. So our Ajax post request is working perfectly fine. And also there's also another change I want you to make. If you remember, we had passed in a URL here, window.location.href, but you can just leave this empty and it will still send that post request to the default page that it is on, which is this /stage2/Pablo. So right now we know that our post request is working perfectly, and it sends it's capable of sending this post request to the backend. So the next step that we now need to take is to, okay, let me close this out. The next step that we need to take, according to our cheat sheet, is that we need to now need to write some more JavaScript that is going to reload a particular section of the page every 10 seconds. So what I mean is, if we come here, we would have to refresh this page in order to see all this data gets delivered, but we do not want to always have the user refresh the page. What we can now do is we can write JavaScript that will only refresh a particular section, or it will only refresh a div every 10 seconds. So what we are going to say is, we would write some JavaScript that is going to refresh this message div every 10 seconds. So what that means is, when this div is refreshed, this for loop is going to be run again. So essentially, new data that had just entered is going to be iterated over and is going to be displayed. So you are going to see how that is going to work shortly. So we now need to create we need to write some new JavaScript that is going to do this. So we're going to say I'm just going to copy this instead of typing it again. So I am going to say .ready, and I'm going to open parentheses and say function, and I'm not going to create a new function. And inside this function, we're going to use the set interval to constantly reload that div every 10 seconds. So I'm going to say set interval, and in here I'm going to pass in function. I'm going to create a new function rather, and then after creating this function, inside this function I will just tell the JavaScript to reload this particular message div every 10 seconds. So what I will say inside this div is I am going to say $, and I would say you have to type exactly what I'm typing in. So we need to give space after creating this parenthesis, and then in quotes just type .message. We are saying .message because the class that we give this div is called message. If it was an ID, we would say #message. So we need to say .message and then give this space also, and then we now need to say, next thing we need to type is .load, and after saying .load we need to say window .location .href, and then we're just going to give it space and put plus, and after giving it space we'll also create this quote and then give it space and say .message, and then we're now going to give it space before the parentheses and can put our semicolon. So make sure what you're typing in is exactly what I'm typing in. So what this piece of code is just going to do is it's going to reload a section of the page, which is this div. JavaScript is very beautiful, so it's going to refresh just that section of the page. Now after doing that, we need to tell the program for how long we would like we need to tell the program on what interval we would like this function to be run. So I am going to pass in 10,000. We're saying 10,000 because I would like this function to be reloaded every 10 seconds. If you wanted it to be reloaded every 1 second, you will just pass in 1,000 for millisecond. So we're writing it in the form of millisecond. So I'm saying 10,000 milliseconds, which is 10 seconds. So I am just going to save that. Now what we can now do is go to the front end, refresh, and then I'm going to open my other browser. Let's open Safari. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new room and enter this room on each of these browsers. So for this name, I'll just say Pablo, username Pablo, and room, I would say let's say anime, and hit submit. So right now I would enter with a different username like TPG, and I will also enter that room that we are just created called anime, ANIME, and hit submit. So what we are going to do now is let's try to send a message. If I say hey man and I hit send, notice what is going to happen. Let's check to see if the message was sent. So it was sent. The message should display here shortly. It's taking time because we are told the program to set an interval of 10 seconds. So this is taking quite a while to load. Let's make sure our code is working perfectly fine. I would like to refresh and see. We might not be in the right room. So let's try to see if we're in the right room. We're in, okay, ANIME. We were in the wrong room. So now you can see there's a message of hey man by Pablo that has been sent. So let's try to say what is up. And then once I hit send, the message should display here shortly. So you can see it has been displayed here, and it's also displayed here. So you can see that our messages are now sending, and our messages are being displayed in both tabs. So our code is working perfectly well. But there is also an issue. Anytime we send a message, right, we have to wait for it to load before we know the message is sent. We want it to be in such a way that immediately we send the message that we send is being displayed right here, instead of it taking time for it to load to actually know that our message has gone. So what we can now say is we need to come to this place right here, and then we need to write some code. So when we come back to the HTML file, we need to take note that there is a div called parent. Now this parent div is just this entire container. So what we now need to do is we need to write JavaScript that is going to reload that entire container anytime somebody sends a message. So we are going to do that right after this Ajax, right after the Ajax has ended. So I will just copy this line right here, and then I will paste it here. I replace message with parents and parents, PERENT. So I would save that, come back to the front end, refresh this, and then once I send a message like I am fine and I hit send, you'll see that the message is no longer displayed here, and then you can see it says I am fine here, I am fine here. So you can say our code is working perfectly well, it's working beautifully. Anytime a message is sent that wasn't sent by us, you can see the message and then the name of the person has sent it, which is Pablo. And then we can also reply messages, and can say that is great, and I can hit send. So that should be displayed here soon. So we can see that the code is working very well. So that is all we are going to talk about in this video. Please, if you have any question, kindly leave your question in the comment section. I know we talked about a lot and it might have been confusing, so if you have any question, just leave it in the comment section and I will gladly reply you. Now remember, if you want to get all the code to this video, there's going to be a link in the description that will take you to where you can get this code on my GitHub. So that is all for today, guys. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.